Imagine the absolute silence of a burial chamber at the heart of a pyramid. The walls, covered with mysterious hieroglyphs, narrate stories of a journey beyond death. At the center, a golden sarcophagus holds the body of a pharaoh, prepared for the afterlife with rituals that defy modern logic. Now, ask yourself, were these ancient Egyptian rites merely superstition, or could they reflect a spiritual truth mentioned in biblical texts? The pharaohs believed that life after death was as real as life on earth. Their bodies were preserved, and their tombs were adorned with instructions for the spiritual journey. Interestingly, biblical texts also speak of life beyond this one, but is there a connection between these two worldviews? The Egyptians viewed death not as an end but as the beginning of an extraordinary journey. For them, the afterlife was a spiritual realm filled with challenges, governed by deities and shrouded in mystery. The Duat, as they called this realm, was described as a place of trials where the deceased soul faced obstacles and judgments. If successful, the soul would reach the field of reeds, an eternal paradise. The Book of the Dead was not a single book but a collection of spells and texts written on papyrus and placed in tombs. Each version was personalized, containing specific instructions to help the deceased overcome the challenges of the Duat, from monsters to divine judgments. One of the most famous spells is the 125th, which describes the judgment before Osiris, where the heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. These texts were carefully illustrated, depicting vivid images of gods and the afterlife, serving as a true spiritual map to eternal life. To better understand these beliefs, it's worth highlighting the origins and purposes of the texts supporting these visions. The Egyptians recorded their spiritual beliefs in works like the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and funerary instructions designed to ensure the soul's safe passage through the Duat. These texts, written in hieroglyphs, were often customized for each individual and placed in tombs as spiritual guides. On the other hand, biblical texts, such as the Old Testament and the Book of Revelation, were written over centuries, reflecting the oral traditions and spiritual and cultural challenges of the Hebrew and Christian peoples. Revelation, for example, was written during a period of persecution and used symbolic imagery to convey messages of judgment and redemption. Both texts, though separated by time and geography, share a common purpose, offering answers to universal questions about death and the afterlife, connecting the earthly realm to the spiritual. The ritual of mummification symbolized this preparation. It wasn't just the preservation of the body but the assurance that the soul, divided into parts like Ba, Ka, and Ak, had a secure guide to the afterlife. The heart, considered the core of the soul, was left in the body to be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. The soul's fate depended on its lightness. Interestingly, this idea resonates with biblical texts. The Bible also describes a final judgment where souls are separated based on their purity and actions in life. Passages like Psalm 23, which mentions the valley of the shadow of death, and the visions of the Apostle John in Revelation, present a spiritual path that echoes the challenges described by the Egyptians in the Book of the Dead. Both speak of an afterlife directly influenced by one's conduct and faith in the earthly realm. For the Egyptians, funerary rituals were also deeply tied to political power. The pharaoh, as an intermediary between gods and men, was seen as the protector of cosmic order, known as Ma'at. Ensuring his safe journey in the afterlife was not only a spiritual matter, but also a way to secure the kingdom's stability and the dynasty's continuity. These rituals became acts of state, projecting power and divinity to their people. These similarities go beyond mere metaphors. Just as the Egyptians used the Book of the Dead as a manual to overcome the traps of the underworld, the Bible offers spiritual guidance for attaining salvation. The Egyptian judgment, with Ma'at scales, is not far removed from the Book of Life, mentioned in Revelation, where only the righteous are admitted to paradise. And there are more coincidences that spark curiosity. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was reborn as Osiris, the god of the afterlife, ensuring the continuity of life. In Christianity, resurrection is also a central pillar, both in the figure of Jesus and in the promise of eternal life to believers. Even separated by millennia, these concepts point to a universal search, What awaits us after death? So, were the Egyptians and biblical texts accessing the same spiritual truth? Or do these similarities arise from a common human desire to understand the mystery of the beyond? To this day, scientists and theologians try to unravel whether these connections are mere cultural coincidence or evidence of something much greater. One thing is certain: both Egyptian rituals and biblical texts make it clear that life is just one chapter of a much larger journey. The spiritual journey has always been surrounded by mystery and fascination. For the Egyptians, the meticulous rituals of mummification and texts like the Book of the Dead were essential to ensure the soul faced Ma'at's judgment, where the heart would be weighed against the feather of truth. If the scales tipped the wrong way, the soul would be devoured by Ammit, a feared creature. But what if, behind this symbolic system, there was something deeper? Despite the similarities, there are important differences between these belief systems. Egyptian judgment, centered on the heart's lightness, represented a quest for cosmic balance and harmony. In contrast, the Bible's judgment is based on obedience to God's will and faith in His mercy. These distinctions reflect differing worldviews. The Egyptians focused on the order of the universe, while biblical texts emphasize the direct relationship between humans and God. Biblical texts also speak of a judgment after death. The idea that every soul will be evaluated based on its actions and moral purity is prominent in Revelation and other passages. Both the Bible and Egyptian rituals share a clear essence: the eternal fate of the soul depends on its deeds in life. Could these similarities point to a universal spiritual truth? Modern science often dismisses Egyptian rituals as mere mythology, and critics frequently interpret biblical texts as metaphors. But what if both were reflections of a broader understanding, a spiritual knowledge we are only beginning to explore? After all, the precision with which the Egyptians planned the Pharaohs' rebirth, their beliefs about eternal life, and even resurrection as Osiris echo the Christian tradition of resurrection and redemption. These comparisons go beyond the surface. Egyptian judgment, centered on the heart's lightness, is analogous to the biblical call for inner purity. Both involve a final destiny where righteous souls are rewarded and unjust ones face consequences. And both traditions point to an afterlife that is not merely a place but a spiritual state of balance, harmony, or condemnation. The lingering question is, are these similarities the result of cultural exchange, or could they indicate a shared spiritual purpose interpreted in different ways? The Egyptians used hieroglyphs to carve their spiritual knowledge in stone. The Bible recorded its truths on scrolls. Yet both cultures shared an unsettling certainty: the afterlife was not something to be taken lightly. This conflict between ancient mysticism and modern interpretation creates an irresistible tension. Are we dealing with cultural coincidences or a spiritual mystery that transcends civilizations? The mystery deepens when scholars notice something surprising. The parallels between Egyptian rituals and biblical texts are more than coincidences. Recent research shows that, despite being separated by cultural and geographical contexts, both seem to share a surprisingly similar view of the afterlife. But how could this be possible? The plot twist comes when some of these discoveries suggest that both the Egyptians and the biblical authors might have been accessing the same universal spiritual knowledge. For example, the judgment of the soul described in Egyptian rituals, where the heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, finds clear echoes in the biblical concept of a final separation between the righteous and the unrighteous, as described in Revelation. Interestingly, modern scientific studies show that Egyptian rituals also had a practical side. Mummification, for instance, preserved the body in nearly impeccable condition, providing valuable insights for archaeologists and historians. On the other hand, theological and historical analyses of biblical texts suggest that many of their accounts have surprising parallels with events and practices of the time, reinforcing the idea that these beliefs, while spiritual, were deeply connected to human reality. Additionally, the impeccable preservation of mummified bodies revealed secrets not only spiritual but also scientific, helping us understand ancient diets, diseases, and practices. This leads to a shocking question. What if Egyptian practices, often dismissed as mythological, were based on a spiritual truth that also resonates in the Bible? The Egyptians didn't just believe in life after death, they had a detailed map for it, inscribed in hieroglyphs and rituals that have withstood the test of time. Could it be that, in some way, they grasped something that the sacred scriptures also attempt to tell us? The unspoken answer is that there is no simple explanation. On the one hand, one could argue that these cultures, in their attempts to understand the mystery of life and death, arrived at similar conclusions through their own cultural lenses. On the other, there's the intriguing hypothesis that all these traditions are fragments of the same ancient spiritual knowledge, a forgotten legacy connecting civilizations. This moment in history places the audience on the edge of reason. After all, if the Egyptians were right about the soul's journey and biblical texts confirm aspects of this view, what else might be hidden within these ancient beliefs? Could these two spiritual systems together provide clues to a much greater secret about our existence? In the end, the message emerging from both worlds, that of the Pharaohs and that of biblical scriptures, is clear and powerful. The life we live here is only a preparation. Whether it's the Egyptian belief that the heart must be as light as a feather or the biblical view that faith and deeds determine eternal destiny, both systems point to a universal truth. Our choices matter, and what we do here echoes into eternity. This greater lesson transcends cultures and religions. It connects the Egyptians, who etched their beliefs into eternal stones, to the biblical authors who entrusted their words to paper. Both seem to whisper the same truth across the centuries. There is something beyond this life that we cannot ignore. Moreover, these stories remind us that, even separated by millennia, ancient civilizations shared a quest for meaning, a universal desire to understand the mystery of the beyond. This connection between Egyptian rituals and biblical texts inspires us to reflect on our own journey and ask ourselves, are we living in a way that prepares our soul for something greater? By uniting such distinct traditions, a message of connection emerges. Perhaps, at our core, all of us, across different times and cultures, are trying to understand the same enigma. After all, the search for spiritual truth is as old as humanity itself. This reflection is not just historical or spiritual, it's deeply personal. What the beliefs of the Pharaohs and the biblical texts teach us is that, no matter where we come from, we all share the same destiny: the inevitable transition to something beyond this life. The visions of the afterlife, both Egyptian and biblical, continue to shape our modern understanding of spirituality and death. Concepts such as judgment, resurrection, and eternal life appear across cultures and religions to this day. The impact of Egyptian hieroglyphs and biblical narratives can be seen in art, literature, and even cinema, keeping the fascination with these ancient ideas alive. Did the Pharaohs and their rituals hold answers to questions we still ask? Or do the sacred scriptures of the Bible carry spiritual truths that the Egyptians sought to understand in their own way? Could ancient civilizations have known something we are still trying to uncover? And what if we are only beginning to grasp the mysteries they already mastered? What do you think? Share your theories in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that connect the ancient world to the mysteries of the unknown.